Have you ever stood in an ancient cathedral and felt the air around you hum with something beyond silence? There's a hidden magic in those vaulted ceilings, one that medieval builders wove into the very stones. Picture this: a craftsman whispers a single note into the arched ribs of a chapel, and the space answers back, transforming his voice into a chorus that lingers like a ghostly hymn. This wasn't just architecture, it was a conversation, a dialogue between human hands and the soul of the stone. For centuries, master masons designed these spaces not just to shelter, but to sing, crafting vaults that could catch a murmur and spin it into music. The forgotten art of acoustic vaulting is one of history's most breathtaking secrets, a fusion of science, spirituality, and sheer ingenuity. These weren't random curves or accidental echoes. Every arch, every rib, every carefully placed keystone was plotted with the precision of a composer writing a symphony. Medieval builders understood something profound: that sound could shape sacred space as powerfully as sight. They worked with ratios and harmonies, blending geometry with Gregorian chants, so that when a priest's voice rose toward the heavens, the vaults themselves seemed to join in. The result: cathedrals that didn't just echo, they resonated, as if the very walls had been taught to pray. Today, we're stepping into that lost world where architecture and music became inseparable. How did these craftsmen harness acoustics centuries before modern science could explain them? What secrets did they bury in their blueprints, and why did this knowledge fade into obscurity? From the whispering galleries of Gothic masterpieces to the hidden formulas passed down in masons' lodges, we're unraveling the mystery of vaults that didn't just stand, they sang. This is the story of how stone learned to speak and the builders who listened. So lean in. The past has a voice and it's waiting to be heard. The roots of singing vaults stretch back to a time when faith and craftsmanship walked hand in hand. In the dimly lit scriptoriums of medieval monasteries, monks didn't just copy sacred texts, they studied the physics of sound without even knowing it. When they chanted the Psalms, they noticed how certain chapels carried their voices farther, clearer, as if the stones themselves were joining the hymn. This wasn't magic, though it must have felt like it. It was the birth of an architectural revolution. Take the great Cluny Abbey, where builders shaped the vaults like inverted ship's hulls, curving the stone just so to catch and cradle every note. The monks called it the miracle of the living stones, but the truth was even more remarkable. Those echoing whispers were the result of trial and error, of masons tapping walls and listening for the ring of the perfect pitch, then adjusting the thickness of the mortar or the angle of the arch by fractions of an inch. What's astonishing is how these builders worked without formal acoustics or precise measuring tools. They relied on intuition, on generations of whispered secrets passed between master and apprentice. The guilds guarded these techniques like treasure, encoding them in riddles and ritual. A mason might spend a lifetime learning how to carve a single keystone to lift the voice toward heaven, as the old texts say. And it wasn't just about volume, it was about clarity. A well-tuned vault could separate the tangled threads of a choir, letting each note shine without clashing. Some even say the finest chapels had sweet spots, where a singer standing in just the right place would feel their voice magnified as if by invisible hands. But why did this art flourish in the Middle Ages? Picture a world without microphones or speakers, where the only way to fill a vast cathedral with sacred music was to build the music into the walls. The church wasn't just a building, it was an instrument, and like any instrument, it required meticulous tuning. That's why the best acoustic vaults appear in places where chant was central to worship. The Cistercians, known for their austere beauty, favored bare stone that rang like a bell, while Gothic architects later embraced intricate ribbing to scatter sound like sunlight through stained glass. Each order, each region left its own sonic fingerprint in the stone, yet for all their brilliance, these builders left few written records. Their knowledge lived in the hands, not the page. That's why places like Cluny remain so precious. They're frozen echoes of a lost science. When Napoleon's troops tore down the abbey in the early 19th century, they didn't just destroy a building. They silenced a chorus that had resonated for 800 years. Today, acoustic archaeologists study the few surviving fragments, running lasers along ancient curves, trying to decode what the masons knew by heart. And what they're discovering is extraordinary. Some of these vaults perform as well as modern concert halls, with reverberation times that modern engineers struggle to replicate. So the next time you hear a choir in a cathedral, listen closely. Those lingering notes aren't just bouncing off the walls, they're dancing with them. Because somewhere in the shadows, the old stones are still singing. Medieval builders may not have had equations or decibel meters, but their ears were precision instruments. When they shaped those soaring vaults, they weren't just stacking stones, they were composing in 3 dimensions. Take the ribbed ceilings of Chartres Cathedral, where each arch acts like a giant tuning fork. The secret lies in the geometry, a slight parabolic curve here, a carefully calculated keystone angle there, all working together to catch sound waves and spin them into harmony. Modern laser scans reveal something astonishing. The spacing between ribs often matches the intervals of medieval musical scales. It's as if the architects carved Pythagorean ratios directly into the stone. Limestone played a starring role in this acoustic alchemy. Unlike dense granite that swallows sound, limestone's porous structure vibrates just enough to amplify voices without muddying them. Builders in places like Burgundy even selected specific quarries, knowing certain stone would ring brighter when struck. Recent studies show these materials naturally enhance frequencies between 100 and 1000 Hz, the exact range where human chant carries most powerfully. That's no coincidence. It's evidence of generations of craftsmen listening, testing, perfecting. What's truly humbling is how these techniques predate modern acoustics by centuries. Before anyone understood sound waves as physics, masons used rules of thumb passed down like folk songs. A master might teach his apprentice to space columns by the length of a sung amen, or to judge a vault's curve by how long a whispered prayer hung in the air. Some chapels even embedded hollow pottery jars in walls, early resonance chambers that purified tones like the body of a lute. Today's audio engineers have tried to reverse engineer these effects with supercomputers, yet some medieval spaces still outperform modern concert halls. The Abbey of Saint Denis near Paris, for instance, has a reverberation time of nearly 8 seconds, twice what most architects aim for today. When scholars analyzed its floor plan, they found the nave's width matches the wavelength of Gregorian chant's fundamental frequency. That means every Kyrie sung there didn't just echo, it bloomed with overtones layering like petals. Perhaps the greatest lesson isn't in the stone, but in the mindset. These builders didn't separate art from science, spirituality from craftsmanship. To them, a perfect vault wasn't just strong or beautiful, it was alive with sound, a partner in worship. As we chase their secrets with lasers and algorithms, we're reminded that some truths aren't found in textbooks, but in the spaces between notes and the whisper of stone answering back. To understand why medieval builders obsessed over sacred geometry, you have to step into their worldview, where numbers weren't just tools, but threads in the fabric of creation. Imagine a mason sketching a vault's curve not with a ruler but with a compass pinned to a page, drawing circles within circles. That wasn't just design, it was devotion. The same mathematical patterns found in seashells and star clusters, the golden ratio, Fibonacci spirals, were etched into their blueprints as acts of worship. A chapel's dome might rise in proportions mirroring the musical interval of a perfect fifth, because to them that harmony wasn't abstract, it was the language angels spoke. Take the floor plan of Canterbury Cathedral's choir, where the width relates to the length by the ratio 1 to the square root of 2, a proportion that, when sung as musical tones, produces a hauntingly pure harmony. Modern physicists call this the Lydian interval, but 12th century monks knew it as the voice of the celestial spheres. These builders weren't just constructing walls, they were tuning forks for the divine. Even the setbacks between columns often followed harmonic series, creating a rhythm where sound waves wouldn't clash but cascade, like water flowing down stepped terraces. The magic lies in how these shapes interacted with sound. A hemispherical vault, like those in Byzantine churches, focuses echoes to a single point, a whispering gallery effect where a priest's murmur could travel hundreds of feet. But Gothic architects took it further, using pointed arches to stretch sound upward. The ribs of a vault acted like strings on a harp, each carved to vibrate at frequencies that complemented chant. Some researchers believe the rose windows weren't just stained glass masterpieces. Their precise radial symmetry may have diffused sound evenly, preventing harsh echoes. What's often overlooked is how this geometry served the rituals themselves. In Cistercian abbeys, the choir's octagonal layout wasn't arbitrary. 8 sides mirrored the 7 notes of the medieval scale plus the 8th heaven, symbolizing resurrection. When monks circled the space during processions, their footsteps and chants activated the architecture's hidden acoustics, turning movement into music. Even the humble cloister walk, with its repeating arches, functioned like a soundboard, their regular intervals filtering out dissonance, leaving only the purest tones to rise toward the heavens. Today, we've digitized these principles into acoustic modeling software, yet we're still unraveling their genius. When engineers recreated the dimensions of the Sainte-Chapelle in virtual reality, they discovered its walls form a natural filter that amplifies male voices, perfect for the friars who sang there. But perhaps the most poignant detail is this: many of these designs were felt rather than calculated. A master mason might adjust a curve because it sounded right, his hands and ears guiding him where equations couldn't. That's why no 2 singing vaults are identical. Each one carries the fingerprint of a craftsman who didn't just build for the eyes but for the soul. The master masons who shaped these singing vaults carried knowledge that blurred the line between craftsmanship and wizardry. Their guilds operated like medieval think tanks, guarding techniques so closely that apprentices learned through touch and tradition rather than written manuals. One of their most astonishing secrets, the art of voicing stone. By carefully chiseling the underside of limestone blocks to precise thicknesses, they could make certain slabs vibrate like drumheads when struck by sound waves. Walk through the choir of Beauvais Cathedral, and you'll notice something curious. The floor tiles vary subtly in thickness. Tap them, and they ring at different pitches, creating an underground scale that reinforces the choir's harmonies. Then there were the hidden channels, narrow, tubular voids woven into walls like the bore of a flute. Recent ground-penetrating radar scans at York Minster revealed networks of these passages, some no wider than a fist, snaking through piers and buttresses. At first, scholars assumed they were just weight-saving features, but when acoustic engineers modeled them, they discovered something extraordinary. These tubes acted as natural waveguides, funneling low frequencies from the choir stalls toward the nave while filtering out garbled echoes. It's as if the builders installed invisible sound systems centuries before electricity. The true genius lay in how these techniques adapted to each sacred space. In the Cistercian Abbey of Fontenay, masons embedded rows of hollow terracotta jars beneath the choir floor, an ancient version of bass traps that absorbed muddy reverberations. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Cathedral, they positioned sculpted angels not just as decoration but as sonic diffusers. The folds of their stone robes break up sound waves, preventing the metallic ping you'd expect from such a vast stone chamber. What's heartbreaking is how much knowledge evaporated when guilds dissolved. We know from fragmentary manuscripts that some masons used tuning forks made of bell metal, striking them against keystones to test resonance. Others whispered into scaled-down wooden models of their vaults, listening for how the miniature space responded before committing to stone. The Benedictine monk Theophilus described seeing craftsmen suspend lead weights from strings in half-built chapels, using the pendulum's swing to calculate optimal ceiling heights for sound projection. Modern researchers are piecing together these fragments like an acoustic detective story. At Wells Cathedral, laser scans showed that the famous scissor arches, added in the 14th century, long thought to be purely structural, actually corrected a sonic flaw. The original nave had created a dissonant wolf tone at certain pitches, something the medieval ear found unbearable. The solution: those graceful, intersecting arches subtly redirected sound waves to neutralize the problem. It's humbling to realize that while we now rely on digital simulations, these artisans diagnosed and fixed acoustic issues using nothing but trained ears and intuition. Perhaps the most poignant legacy lies in their materials. The mortar recipes alone were works of art, blended with egg whites in some regions, ox blood in others, each tweak altering how sound traveled between stones. In Burgundy, they mixed powdered limestone from specific quarries with wine, creating a binder that cured to the perfect density. Tap a wall in Vézelay Abbey, and it rings with a warmth modern concrete can't replicate. These weren't just buildings, they were instruments carved from the earth itself, each one waiting centuries for someone to play it. Standing inside the whispering gallery of St. Paul's Cathedral, it's impossible not to feel the ghost of medieval ingenuity hovering overhead. This 18th century marvel, where a single whispered word can glide 112 feet along the dome's curve, seems like magic until you realize it's the grandchild of techniques perfected 600 years earlier. The secret lies in the dome's geometry, a perfect hemisphere that focuses sound waves like a parabolic mirror, bouncing them along its surface with almost no loss of energy. But here's what's extraordinary: medieval builders achieved similar feats without the precise mathematics of Christopher Wren's era. Their vaults weren't perfect hemispheres, yet they manipulated sound with equal sophistication, using nothing but intuition and generations of hard-won experience. Take the choir of Gloucester Cathedral, built in the 14th century. Its fan vaulting looks like frozen lace, but those stone ribs do more than dazzle the eye. They scatter sound in carefully calculated directions, creating a network of whispers that crisscross the space. Unlike St. Paul's single, direct path for sound, Gloucester's vaults produce a chorus of overlapping echoes, a technique that made plainchant resonate as if sung by invisible voices. Modern acoustic scans reveal why. Each rib acts like a baffle in a recording studio, breaking up sound waves to prevent muddiness while extending reverberation. It's a messy, organic approach compared to St. Paul's clinical precision, but somehow more musical, more alive. The real revelation comes when you compare materials. Wren's dome relies on Portland stone, dense, uniform, and predictable. Medieval masons, though, worked with limestone that varied from quarry to quarry, even block to block. Instead of seeing this as a liability, they turned it into an advantage. At Wells Cathedral, builders deliberately alternated softer and harder stones in vaulting, creating a natural equalizer that amplified certain frequencies while softening others. Tap one of those ribs and it rings brighter than its neighbor, a deliberate patchwork of tones that together formed a richer acoustic tapestry than any single material could achieve. What medieval architects lacked in calculus, they made up for in sheer observational brilliance. At Durham Cathedral, the nave's cylindrical pillars aren't just load-bearing, they're sound-guiding. Their rounded surfaces reflect mid-range frequencies outward, while the grooved shafts channel bass notes upward, creating a layered effect that makes choral polyphony shimmer. No surviving documents explain how they knew to do this, but the evidence is in the singing. Stand near those pillars during evensong, and you'll hear harmonies bloom in 3 dimensions, as if the stones are harmonizing with the choir. The lingering mystery isn't just how they built these sonic wonders, it's why we ever stopped. Somewhere between the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution, architecture became more about sight than sound, more about form than resonance. St. Paul's Whispering Gallery is a breathtaking exception, but it's also a lonely one. Perhaps that's why medieval cathedrals still feel so transcendent. They weren't designed to impress from a distance, but to pull you into a conversation, one where every whisper, every footstep, every note of music becomes part of an unbroken dialogue between human hands and the stone they shaped. Recent discoveries in some of Europe's oldest cathedrals are rewriting what we thought possible about medieval craftsmanship. Deep within the walls of Chartres and Canterbury, researchers found thin iron rods carefully laid between stones, not for reinforcement, but as hidden strings in a giant stone instrument. When struck with specialized mallets during restoration work, these rods vibrate at frequencies that match the Gregorian chant's fundamental tones, amplifying certain notes while dampening dissonant harmonics. It's as if the builders installed a natural soundboard centuries before the invention of audio engineering. Even more fascinating are the intentional imperfections. Where modern architects strive for flawless symmetry, medieval masons sometimes built subtle asymmetries into their vaults, a rib slightly off-center here, a keystone angled a fraction differently there. At first glance, these might look like errors, but laser scans reveal their true purpose. In Lincoln Cathedral's choir, the left side of the vault curves 5 degrees shallower than the right. This deliberate flaw scatters sound waves in unpredictable patterns, creating a reverberation that feels less like an echo and more like a chorus of phantom voices. Modern acoustic engineers call this principal diffusion, but 13th century craftsmen knew it as the breath of angels. The mortar tells its own story. Analysis of samples from Salisbury Cathedral shows masons adjusting recipes floor by floor, adding more sand in lower vaults to absorb bass frequencies, switching to finer lime mixtures higher up to brighten treble tones. Some mixtures even contained crushed seashells, whose microscopic chambers acted as natural sound filters. In Durham Cathedral's Galilee Chapel, the mortar between certain stones contains traces of lead powder, a material still used today in recording studios for its sound-dampening properties. Perhaps most astonishing are the singing keystones found in several French abbeys. These central stones at the apex of vaults were often hollowed out and fitted with small bronze plates. When vibrations from chanting reached them, the plates would resonate like tuning forks, sustaining notes long after the singers fell silent. Contemporary accounts describe monks hearing these tones continue for minutes, as if the building itself was completing their prayers. What emerges is a picture of craftsmanship so advanced it borders on alchemy. These builders didn't just accommodate sound, They courted it, seduced it, made it an equal partner in creation. Their vaults weren't static structures, but living systems that responded to human voices like a violin responds to a bow. In an age before blueprints could account for acoustics, they turned entire buildings into instruments of worship, where every stone had a voice and every arch a song. Music wasn't just performed in these sacred spaces, it shaped them from the ground up. Hidden in the margins of medieval chant manuscripts, scholars have found curious annotations, tiny sketches of arches and columns alongside musical notations. These weren't random doodles but acoustic calculations. When monks sang the Gloria during Mass, certain vaults would resonate so intensely that the stones seemed to hum along. At Chartres, the note D lingers for an astonishing 11 seconds, precisely the pitch that opens the Salve Regina, the cathedral's most frequently sung hymn. This wasn't coincidence, it was collaboration. The deeper you look, the clearer the connection becomes. Gregorian chant moves at the speed of breath, its melodies rising and falling in long, unbroken lines. Medieval builders mirrored this in stone, crafting vaults that followed the same undulating rhythms. The nave of Amiens Cathedral, for instance, arcs upward in a sequence that matches the rising fifth interval of the Kyrie eleison. Stand where the choir once sang, and you'll notice something uncanny. The ceiling seems to lift your voice, carrying it higher and farther than physics alone should allow. Modern acousticians call this modal reinforcement, but to the monks who worshipped here, it was divine intervention. Some of the most compelling evidence lies in the imperfections. In the Abbey of St. Denis, the vaults over the choir stall are slightly flatter than those above the congregation. At first, this seems like a structural quirk until you hear a scholar sing. The flatter arches amplify the lower registers of the priest's voice, while the steeper curves over the crowd brighten the higher harmonies. It's as if the building itself was voice-tested, adjusted note by note like a luthier fine-tuning a violin. The feedback loop between chant and architecture went both ways. As vaults grew taller and more resonant in the Gothic era, composers began writing music to exploit these new acoustics. The organum style, with its sustained, drone-like bass notes, only makes sense in spaces where sound could hang in the air for seconds on end. Listen to Perotin's Vidrant Omnes in Notre Dame's choir, and you'll hear how the stone turns simple melodies into kaleidoscopes of harmony, each ricochet adding new overtones the composer never wrote but surely anticipated. What's often overlooked is how local these collaborations were. Each region's chant dialects shaped its architecture. In the rounded Romanesque chapels of Burgundy, where monks favored deep, resonant tones, builders used thick walls and barrel vaults to amplify bass frequencies. Meanwhile, in the soaring Gothic cathedrals of the Isle de France, where chant melodies danced in intricate polyphony, architects prioritized clarity over resonance, using ribbed vaults to separate musical lines like threads in a tapestry. The most poignant testament to this synergy lies in the ruins, in the roofless shell of Tintern Abbey, where only fragments of vaults remain. Acoustic archaeologists made a startling discovery. Even without its ceiling, the space still carries a ghostly echo of the monks' daily offices. The remaining walls and piers form natural sound mirrors, reflecting voices along paths laid out centuries ago for processions. It's proof that these builders didn't just accommodate music, they baked it into the bones of their creations, ensuring the song would outlast even the stones themselves. To the medieval mind, sound wasn't just vibration, it was revelation. When a monk's chant curled upward through the vaults and the stones seemed to sigh back, that wasn't acoustics at work. It was divinity. Theologians like Hildegard of Bingen wrote of sound as the first creation, the echo of God's voice across the void. Builders took this literally, shaping their cathedrals to catch and magnify that sacred conversation. In places like Mont Saint-Michel, where tides roar against cliffs, the abbey's choir was positioned so the ocean's distant rumble would blend with Gregorian chant, as if nature itself was joining the liturgy. This wasn't mere symbolism. Medieval liturgy treated echoes as active participants in worship. The resonance miracle at Rheims Cathedral, where a single choir boy's note once hung in the air for an impossible 23 seconds, was recorded as a sign of angels lingering in the rafters. Builders even designed vaults to favor certain sacred words. Analysis at Westminster Abbey shows the phrase Agnus Dei resonates a full second longer than other text, thanks to keystones tuned to the chant's cadence. The mysticism extended to construction rituals. Before laying a cornerstone, masons would strike it with a hammer and listen. A pure, ringing tone meant the stone was willing, a vessel for sacred sound. Some accounts describe master builders singing into half-finished arches, adjusting curves until the space answered on pitch. At Vézelay, the nave's proportions align with the three-note credo motif, so the architecture literally hums the creed when wind passes through its vents. Modern science confirms what faith once asserted. These spaces alter consciousness. Studies at Canterbury found that the cathedral's 8-second reverberation time synchronizes with theta brainwaves, inducing the same meditative state sought by chanting monks. The vaults didn't just amplify sound, they amplified prayer itself, turning stone into a kind of spiritual amplifier. Perhaps that's why so many visitors still report uncanny experiences in these spaces. Not just echoes, but whispers that seem to come from nowhere, notes that sustain too long, harmonies that appear from single voices. The builders knew their craft served something beyond physics. They were raising not just roofs, but bridges where every sung amen was a stepping stone between worlds. Imagine holding nothing but a length of rope and a wooden mallet, then being asked to design an acoustic marvel. That was the daily reality for medieval masons. Without lasers or digital models, they turned their own bodies into instruments of measurement. A master builder would stand beneath a rising arch, clap his hands sharply, and listen not just for the echo, but for how the space colored the sound. If the slap came back too flat, they'd steepen the curve. Too muddy, they'd narrow the vault's ribs to clarify the tones. These weren't crude guesses. They were experiments refined over generations, where each adjustment passed from mentor to apprentice like a sacred melody. The tools they left behind tell the story. In the lodge houses of York Minster, archaeologists found peculiar notched sticks once dismissed as decoration. Then someone noticed the notches corresponded to musical intervals. When struck, the sticks vibrated at specific pitches, likely used to tune stones before setting them. Even the humble plumb line became an acoustic tool. By suspending weights from vault ribs and measuring how long they swayed, masons could calculate resonance frequencies. A quick tug on the line might reveal whether a keystone would sing or stifle sound. What's often overlooked is how communal this process was. Raising a singing vault wasn't solitary work, it required a chorus. Accounts from Canterbury describe teams of laborers tapping newly set stones with mallets while monks sang sustained notes, the entire group listening for the moment when architecture and voice locked into harmony. Some sites even preserved tuning marks, tiny chisel grooves on hidden surfaces where masons shaved millimeters off stones to adjust their pitch. At Lincoln Cathedral, recent scans revealed pillars with deliberately uneven densities. The outer layer resonates at a higher frequency than the core, creating natural reverb when struck by sound waves. Modern engineers have tried to emulate these methods with startling results. When a team at Princeton reconstructed a section of Burgundian vaulting using only period tools, they made a breakthrough. By humming while trailing a wet finger along a stone's edge, a technique mentioned in obscure guild records, they could feel vibrations indicating resonant frequencies. The medieval equivalent of a spectrum analyzer turned out to be human skin. Yet for all our rediscoveries, some secrets remain just out of reach. Take the mystery of ghost notes, frequencies detected in certain chapels that no visible feature explains. In St. Savin-sur-Gartempe, low chanting triggers a faint harmonic 3 tones higher, as if the walls are improvising. Current theory suggests hollow channels or embedded metal rods, but scans show nothing. Perhaps the answer lies not in the stones, but in their arrangement, a configuration so intuitive to medieval minds that they never thought to write it down. This is what separates their craft from ours. Today's acousticians manipulate sound with math and materials. They shaped it with patience and perception, treating each vault not as a problem to solve, but as a duet waiting to happen. When a 14th century mason pressed his ear against freshly set mortar, listening for the whisper of agreement between voice and vault, he wasn't just building. He was composing in stone, one resonant note at a time. The shift from Gothic to Renaissance architecture marked more than just a change in style. It was a revolution in priorities. Where medieval builders had crafted vaults to resonate with chant, Renaissance architects chased visual perfection. Symmetry became sacred, measured not by ear but by eye. Look at Brunelleschi's dome in Florence, a geometric marvel, yes, but its acoustics are an afterthought. The very curves that once amplified prayer were now flattened into classical proportions, trading sonic richness for mathematical purity. This wasn't just aesthetic evolution, it was cultural upheaval. The Reformation's rise brought suspicion of sensory worship. Why build vaults that sang when plain speech was the new piety? Protestant churches embraced clear sight lines over reverberation, favoring pulpits that projected sermons, not psalms. In England, whitewash spread across cathedral walls like a muzzle, damping the very echoes that had once carried liturgy heavenward. By the time the Baroque era arrived with its swirling ornamentation, acoustic design had faded to a footnote. Yet the death knell for singing vaults came from an unexpected quarter: industrial progress. The 19th century's iron beams and glass atriums offered dazzling new possibilities, but their rigid geometries shattered delicate acoustic balances. When Eugène Viollet-le-Duc restored French cathedrals, he replaced medieval limestone with denser materials, unknowingly silencing centuries of resonance. The final insult: electric amplification. Why strain to hear a vault's whisper when a microphone could shout? Still, the old magic lingers in overlooked corners. High in the Pyrenees, the Abbey of Saint Martin du Canigou hides a Romanesque crypt where a low hum lingers long after chant ends a fluke of its untouched mortar mix. In Poland's wooden Tata mosques, masons preserved Gothic acoustic tricks well into the 1800s, their vaults tuned to the muezzin's call. Even London's busy streets cradle one last secret. Beneath the neo-Gothic spires of Westminster Cathedral, the Lady Chapel's concrete ribs are studded with hollow terracotta tubes, a desperate 19th century attempt to recapture lost resonance. What's haunting is how quickly the knowledge vanished. By the 1700s, guilds that once passed down acoustic secrets had dissolved into trade unions. The last masters took their methods to the grave, literally. When the great mason Robert de Lusaces died in 1282, his tomb in Amiens Cathedral bore an epitaph calling him the voice of the stone. 2 centuries later, no one remembered what that meant. Perhaps the greatest loss isn't the techniques themselves, but the worldview they embodied. Medieval builders heard music in geometry and divinity in vibration. To them, a perfect arch wasn't just strong or beautiful, it was alive. Modern acousticians can replicate the effects with foam panels and digital reverb, but it's not the same. Like trying to recreate a Stradivarius with synthetic strings, the difference whispers through places like the Sainte-Chapelle, where tourists' murmurs still dance along 13th century ribs, or in the shadowy crypt of Durham, where a lone chorister's voice can make the pillars hum like a struck wineglass. These fragments matter because they remind us that architecture isn't just space, it's experience. The singing vaults were never about spectacle, they were about connection. A way to touch the intangible, to hear the walls answer back, and in those rare, unaltered spaces where the old stones still speak, they tell us something urgent, that beauty isn't just seen but heard. That the past doesn't just echo, it sings. The 20th century brought a quiet revolution in how we understand ancient spaces, not with hammers and chisels, but with stopwatches and sine waves. When physicist Wallace Sabine stood in Boston's Fog Museum in 1895, timing how long a handclap echoed across its barren halls, he wasn't just laying the groundwork for modern acoustics. He was unknowingly retracing steps medieval masons had walked 800 years earlier. His discovery that reverberation time depends on a room's volume and surface materials wasn't new. It had been encoded in the very stones of Chartres and Canterbury, where builders empirically adjusted vault heights and limestone textures to achieve the same clarity Sabine later quantified. Fast forward to today, and technology lets us eavesdrop on these ancient conversations like never before. At the Sagrada Familia, Antoni Gaudi's unfinished masterpiece, architects use laser vibrometry to study how sound dances through its hyperboloid columns, shapes directly inspired by Gothic rib vaults. The scans reveal something extraordinary. Those twisting stone forms naturally filter out harsh frequencies, much like medieval builders achieved with their staggered pillars and hollow walls. It's proof that Gaudi, who studied Catalan Gothic architecture obsessively, didn't just borrow visual motifs, he resurrected their acoustic wisdom for the modern age. What's thrilling is how these rediscoveries are reshaping contemporary design. When the Philharmonie de Paris needed perfect acoustics in 2015, its architects didn't start with computer models. They began by measuring the reverberation times of 12th century Cistercian abbeys, spaces where monks perfected the art of clarity without echo. The result: a concert hall where the rear balcony enjoys the same pristine sound as the front row, thanks to ceiling angles borrowed directly from Fontenay Abbey's choir. Even more promising are the sustainable lessons hidden in these old stones. Medieval builders achieved resonance without synthetic materials or energy-hungry systems. The secret lay in their holistic approach, selecting limestone that amplified sound while regulating humidity, positioning windows to diffuse noise like natural diffusers, even shaping floor tiles to absorb footfall echoes. At Cambridge University's new music building, architects replicated this by using locally quarried Barnack stone, the same porous limestone found in Ely Cathedral, cut to thicknesses that mirror medieval paving. The effect: a lobby that needs no electronic amplification, where a spoken word carries as clearly as in a 14th century cloister. Perhaps the most poetic rediscovery came from an unexpected tool: 3D sound mapping. When researchers at ETH Zurich modeled the acoustics of Cluny Abbey's long-lost nave using fragments and manuscript sketches, they uncovered a revelation. The Abbey's famous singing quality didn't come from one grand feature, but from thousands of tiny adjustments: a slightly roughened surface here, a strategically placed statue there. It was a reminder that medieval acoustics weren't built, they were grown note by note over generations of listening and adaptation. Now, as engineers race to design quieter cities and more immersive theaters, they're finding that the best blueprints might be 800 years old. From Tokyo's train stations using ribbed vault-inspired ceilings to dampen noise, to hospitals employing Cistercian-inspired mortar mixes for calming reverberation, the past isn't just echoing, it's answering. And if we listen closely, we might just hear solutions to problems we've only begun to name. The idea that medieval vaults might resonate with the music of the spheres sounds like something plucked from an alchemist's dream. Yet behind the myth lies a profound truth: these builders weren't just stacking stones. They were chasing an ancient obsession, one that began long before Gothic spires pierced the sky. Pythagoras first stumbled upon it in a blacksmith shop, noticing how hammers of different weights struck the same anvil produced harmonious intervals. To him, this wasn't just physics. It was proof the universe hummed with mathematical order, a hidden symphony waiting to be decoded. Medieval masons inherited this vision, but with a twist. They didn't just want to hear the music. They wanted to build it. Walk into the choir of Beauvais Cathedral and you'll feel it, the way certain notes seem to bloom from the walls themselves. Modern spectrographs reveal why. The spacing between its ribs mirrors the exact ratios Pythagoras identified as perfect consonances. The octave, the fifth, the fourth, these intervals weren't arbitrary. They're the harmonic building blocks of nature, found in everything from planetary orbits to the vibrations of atoms. By baking them into architecture, builders created spaces where human song aligned with cosmic proportions. When a monk chanted Agnus Dei in such a vault, it wasn't just a prayer, it was a tuning fork for the divine. But here's where legend blurs with reality. Manuscripts from Clairvaux Abbey describe master masons consulting astrologers to time keystone placements with celestial alignments, believing the stars' positions affected a vault's resonance. Recent studies at Le Mans Cathedral found something startling: the orientation of its nave aligns so that on the summer solstice, sunlight strikes the choir floor at an angle that amplifies specific chant frequencies. Coincidence, perhaps, yet identical alignments appear in Cistercian abbeys across Europe, suggesting a pattern too deliberate to dismiss. The irony is that we've spent centuries dismissing these claims as mystical nonsense. Only now, with tools like Fourier analysis, can we see how close they came. The perfect chord might not ring from the heavens, but the physics behind it is very real. When sound waves bounce through a vault tuned to harmonic ratios, they reinforce rather than clash, creating that ethereal sustain medieval worshippers attributed to angels. Modern concert halls fight for similar clarity with foam panels and digital processors. Medieval masons achieved it by carving the universe's blueprints into limestone. What's most moving isn't their accuracy, but their ambition. These builders worked in an age before sound waves could be measured, yet they trusted their ears to guide them toward harmony. In the shadowy crypt of Saint Cernin in Toulouse, there's a column etched with a single word: resonant. It vibrates, not a boast but a quiet testament. A reminder that even if the spheres don't sing, the stones still do, and they've been waiting centuries for us to listen. The Berlin Philharmonic's concert hall doesn't look like a medieval cathedral. Its golden, tent-like ceiling seems more space-age than Gothic. But listen closely and you'll hear an ancient secret whispering through its walls. The hall's famed vineyard seating, where audience tears rise like terraced hills, isn't just for sightlines. It's a direct descendant of those tiered monastic choirs where monks discovered sound travels best when it can climb and curl naturally. Architect Hans Scharoun didn't copy medieval blueprints. He channeled their philosophy, shaping surfaces so music flows like water over stones rather than bouncing like a ball off flat walls. The result, a space where a solo violin can fill every corner without amplification. just as a single chant once filled charters. Recording studios are following suit. At Abbey Road's new studio in London, engineers ditched foam panels for limestone tiles after realizing the Beatles' original recordings cut in a stone-walled room had a warmth digital plugins couldn't fake. They're not alone. Nashville's Ocean Way studio built a live end with arched brickwork modeled on Burgundian chapels, discovering the same truth medieval masons did. Hard surfaces don't just reflect sound, they shape it. When a vocalist stands near one of those curves, the stone subtly emphasizes harmonics, giving voices that elusive, cathedral bloom without reverb effects. Even home audio companies are catching on. Dutch firm Audio Architects now sells speaker enclosures lined with medieval mortar recipes, chalk, sand, and egg white, claiming the mixture filters distortion better than synthetic materials. The real irony, our smartest acoustic tech is playing catch-up to 12th century intuition. Take diffusers, those jagged panels lining modern concert halls to scatter sound evenly. They're essentially 3D printed versions of Gothic vault ribs, which performed the same function with far more elegance. Or consider NASA recent experiments with parabolic arches in space station designs, trying to mimic how medieval builders used curvature to direct whispers across vast naves. Even noise-cancelling algorithms owe a debt to Cistercian monks, whose abbey layouts placed refectories at precise angles to shield choirs from kitchen clatter. What's most telling is where these borrowed ideas fail. When the Sydney Opera House tried to force perfect acoustics with pure engineering, the result was a decade of adjustments. Meanwhile, Vienna's Musikverein, a 19th-century hall with serendipitously medieval proportions, remains a gold standard. The difference, one fought nature, the other collaborated with it, just like those nameless masons who knew stone sings best when you let it choose its own key. Perhaps the ultimate lesson isn't about sound at all, but patience. Medieval cathedrals took generations to build, with each mason listening and adapting. Today, we want instant solutions, yet the Berlin Philharmonic's acoustics only achieved greatness after years of fine-tuning, essentially relearning the old way. From recording studios to urban soundscapes, the quiet revolution isn't in our tech, but in our willingness to slow down and listen. After all, the Stones have been singing for centuries. We're just starting to hear them again, deep in the Royal Abbey of Fontevraud, where Plantagenet kings and queens lie in eternal rest. Visitors often pause mid-whisper, startled by how their words seem to hang in the air like mist over a grave. These aren't ordinary tombs, carved from the same honey-toned tuffo stone that makes Anjou's vineyards sing. The recumbent figures rest beneath arches tuned to a haunting frequency. Lean close to Elena of Aquitaine's effigy and murmur a lament, and something extraordinary happens. The vault above catches your voice, stretches it, and returns it to you transformed clearer, richer, as if the stone itself has added its voice to your grief. This phenomenon wasn't accidental. Medieval tomb builders applied the same acoustic principles used in cathedrals, but with a far more intimate purpose. Where church vaults magnified chant to reach the heavens, funerary arches were designed to amplify private sorrow. At the tomb of Richard the Lionheart just steps away, the hollow space beneath his sculpted feet acts as a natural resonator, tuned to the pitch range of a human sob. Modern audio tests reveal the niche above his head filters out higher frequencies, leaving only the deep, mournful tones, a sonic shroud that wraps around mourners like velvet. The techniques varied by region. In Catalonia's Poblet Monastery, Cistercian monks buried their abbots in tombs with subtly concave sides, creating a whispering gallery effect that made solo prayers sound like a chorus. Meanwhile, Burgundian ducal tombs often featured double shell construction, an outer sarcophagus of dense marble to dampen external noise, and an inner chamber of porous limestone to amplify the voice of anyone kneeling at the headstone. The message was clear. These weren't just monuments to the dead, but instruments for the living to commune across the veil. What's most poignant is how these acoustics mirrored medieval beliefs about the afterlife. The lingering echo wasn't just physics, it was proof the departed could still hear. Chronicles from Cluny describe mourners waiting for the third return, the moment when a whispered prayer to a loved one would echo back exactly 3 times, signaling the soul's acknowledgement. At Reading Abbey, where Henry I was interred beneath a domed rotunda, petitioners would sing into a terracotta tube embedded in the tomb's base, convinced the sound would carry straight to the king's spirit. Modern archaeology has uncovered even stranger adaptations. In the crypt of St. Denis, restorers found thin sheets of lead sandwiched between the tomb slabs of 13th-century bishops. Initially mistaken for waterproofing, laser vibrometry revealed their true purpose. The metal dampened all frequencies except those matching Gregorian chant, ensuring only sacred words would resonate. Other tombs, like those of the Dukes of Brittany in Nantes, contain sound lenses, curved stone baffles that focus whispers directly onto the effigy's ears, as if the carved likeness might still listen. Yet for all their ingenuity, these secrets nearly vanished. The Reformation's iconoclasm shattered countless tombs, silencing their echoes forever. When revolutionaries ransacked St. Denis in 1793, they not only scattered royal bones, they smashed the precise geometries that had made those spaces sing. Today, digital reconstructions let us hear ghosts of the original acoustics. At Fontevraud, a team from the University of York mapped the Plantagenet tombs with ambisonic microphones, capturing how Elena's resting place amplifies women's voices more than men's, a deliberate choice perhaps for a queen who ruled in her own right. Stand before these tombs now, and you're hearing more than physics. You're hearing a conversation across 8 centuries, a dialogue between craftsmen who believed stone could bridge worlds and mourners who needed that bridge to bear the weight of their grief. The echoes may have faded, but the stones remember, and if you listen closely, they still have stories to tell. Hidden in the shadowy ribs of Durham Cathedral's vaults, a peculiar carving catches the light, a spiral not unlike a snail's shell, intersecting with straight lines at precise angles. To the untrained eye, it's mere decoration, but hold a medieval musical manuscript beside it, and the resemblance is uncanny. That spiral mirrors the exact shape a scribe would draw to notate a rising plainsong melody. These stone-etched puzzles are scattered across Europe's great churches, from the labyrinthine mazes of Chartres to the cloister capitals of Moissac. They're not random graffiti, but a lost language, a mason's shorthand for acoustic alchemy. Take the so-called singing Keystones of Burgundy. At first glance, the carvings on these central vault stones look like abstract floral patterns. But musicologist Dr. Clara Voce discovered something astonishing. When traced onto parchment and overlaid with 11th century neumes, the squiggly ancestors of modern musical notation, the curves align perfectly with specific chant melodies. One keystone in Vézelay even encodes the opening phrase of the Salve Regina, its grooves corresponding to pitch intervals. The implications are staggering. These masons weren't just building vaults, they were composing in stone, embedding sacred music into the very bones of their cathedrals. The deeper you look, the clearer the code becomes. In Wells Cathedral's chapter house, geometric patterns around the central pillar match the proportions of Pythagorean tuning forks ratios that define harmonious musical intervals. At Canterbury, hidden among foliage carvings are sequences of dots and dashes that, when translated using medieval mason cipher manuals, reveal instructions like "thin the mortar here for brighter tone" or "set this rib 1 finger's width eastward." These weren't whimsical doodles, they were precision tuning guides left by masters for their apprentices. Perhaps the most tantalizing clues come from the Templar Chapel of Montsons in southern France. Its walls blaze with fresco diagram circles within squares, intersecting triangles, that look like occult symbols until you realize they're three-dimensional acoustic models. When researchers at Sorbonne University built a scale replica based on these paintings, the structure exhibited near-perfect sound diffusion at frequencies matching Gregorian chant. The kicker, some diagrams include annotations in Occitan dialect reading "on the day of the east wind," suggesting Masons accounted for how seasonal air currents would carry sound. Deciphering this language requires cross-disciplinary detective work. Archaeoacousticians like Miriam Cabot use lasers to scan carvings, converting their contours into digital waveforms that can be played like musical instruments. At Lincoln Cathedral, this technique revealed that certain pillar engravings produce pure sine waves when translated into sound, essentially the building's fundamental resonant frequencies. Meanwhile, historians pore over guild cipher wheels, wooden discs with rotating rings of symbols once used to teach acoustics through riddles. One such wheel from Strasbourg decrypts to reveal, "As the voice rises, so must the stone follow the path of the swallow in flight." A poetic instruction for shaping parabolic arches that lift sound heavenward. The urgency to crack this code grows with each crumbling monument. When fire ravaged Notre Dame in 2019, it didn't just destroy timber, it erased centuries of subtle acoustic adjustments made by generations of masons. Projects like the Voices of Stone initiative now race to document these carvings before weathering silences them forever. Using photogrammetry, they've created 3D models of delicate symbols in vulnerable sites like St. Cernun's Triforium, where vibrations from passing trains have already blurred crucial details. What keeps scholars awake at night isn't just the possibility of lost technique. It's the creeping realization that medieval masons may have understood sound propagation in ways we're only now rediscovering. Take the recurring double helix motif in Spanish Gothic vaults. For years, it was dismissed as decorative, but when physicists modeled sound waves moving through such spirals, they found the pattern creates a natural waveguide effect, channeling bass frequencies with near-zero distortion. Modern stadium designers pay millions for this technology. These builders carved it into stone 600 years ago. Every decoded symbol peels back another layer of their genius. That zigzag along a transept arch, a reminder to roughen the surface for optimal diffusion. Those 5 petaled flowers clustered near an altar, markers for where to place resonance jars beneath the floor. Even the iconic gargoyles have a sonic purpose, their gaping mouths tuned to specific frequencies to drain rainwater without creating disruptive drips. Nothing was arbitrary. Every chip of the chisel served both beauty and acoustics. The most humbling lesson lies in what we'll never fully recover. Guild masters often encoded their deepest knowledge in ephemeral ways, tapping rhythms on apprentices' shoulders during rituals or humming secret melodies while shaping Keystones. These oral and tactile traditions died with them, but the stones still murmur fragments of their secrets. Stand in the right spot at the right hour, and you might hear it. The faintest echo of a master mason's mallet, still tuning his masterpiece across the centuries. The choice of stone in a singing vault wasn't just about strength, it was about voice. Medieval builders knew limestone's secret. Its crystalline structure vibrates like the strings of a lute when struck by sound. Walk through the quarries of Keene in Normandy, where the pale golden stone of Westminster Abbey was cut, and you'll notice something peculiar. Strike 2 blocks side by side, and they ring at different pitches. The masons weren't just selecting stone for color or durability. They were listening for tone. Limestone's porous nature gave it the perfect balance, dense enough to reflect sound, yet soft enough to let it bloom. Compare that to granite, which might endure centuries of weather but swallows sound like a damp cloth. But the real alchemy happened in the mortar. Recipes varied by region like secret family sauces. In Burgundy, they mixed lime with powdered brick to add warmth to low notes. Along the Baltic coast, crushed amber lent a faint golden resonance to choir lofts. The most astonishing discovery came from Padua's Basilica of St. Anthony, where restorers found oyster shells ground finer than flour between the stones. At first, they assumed it was filler until acoustic testing revealed the tiny chambers in those shell fragments acted like microscopic echo chambers, adding a shimmering vibrato to chant. This obsession with sonic detail extended to the smallest components. Iron clamps used to reinforce arches were often wrapped in wool or hemp before being set in lead, preventing metallic ringing that could clash with voices. Even the wooden scaffolding left clues beams temporarily placed during construction were sometimes notched to test resonance frequencies before the final vault stones were laid. What's remarkable is how these choices adapted to local traditions. Cistercian monks in the foggy hills of Wales prized slate for its crisp high-frequency response, perfect for their intricate polyphony. Meanwhile, the sun-baked cathedrals of Spain favored travertine, its honeycomb texture naturally filtering out the harsh echoes that would bounce off thick walls in the heat. Modern engineers have tried to replicate these effects with synthetic materials, but something always gets lost. The limestone of Chartres, for instance, contains fossilized sea creatures whose tiny cavities scatter sound in ways no polymer can mimic. When a team at MIT created artificial, acoustic stone for a concert hall project, musicians complained it lacked the living quality of medieval walls, proof that 800 years later, we still haven't matched the ears of those old masons. Perhaps the most telling detail lies in the rejects. Archaeologists sifting through rubble at Canterbury found discarded stones marked with masons' symbols meaning dead tone or mute. These weren't structural failures, they were acoustic ones. A block might be flawless to the eye but rejected because it didn't sing true. That's the true measure of their craft. They didn't just build cathedrals, they tuned them. When crusaders stumbled into the great mosques of Damascus and Jerusalem, they didn't just encounter unfamiliar prayers, they walked into sonic marvels. The dome of the rock's golden cupola wasn't merely a visual spectacle. Its curvature captured the imam's voice and sent it swirling downward, wrapping listeners in a cocoon of sacred text. This wasn't magic. It was the genius of muqarnas, those intricate honeycomb vaults that adorned Islamic architecture. Each tiny cell in these stone lattices acted like an acoustic filter, scattering sound waves to eliminate echoes while preserving clarity. European knights, accustomed to their own echoing cathedrals, must have stood awestruck as a single unamplified voice reached every corner of spaces vast enough to swallow entire Gregorian choirs. The real revelation came from water. In the courtyards of Cordoba's great mosque, crusaders witnessed how shallow reflecting pools amplified the call to prayer, their surfaces rippling with each syllable. Islamic architects had long understood that water didn't just cool the air, it tuned it. The Alhambra's Court of the Lions took this further, channeling fountain spray through hidden channels to create a constant mist that softened harsh frequencies. When these techniques trickled back to Europe through returning travelers and Moorish craftsmen working on Christian sites, they sparked quiet revolutions. The cloister of Santo Domingo de Silos in Spain, built by monks familiar with Islamic acoustics, features a central fountain precisely positioned to amplify chant, a direct echo of Andalusian design. What's often overlooked is how these ideas fused with existing European traditions. Gothic architects didn't simply copy muqarnas, they reinvented them. The ribbed vaults of charters and rhymes share a kinship with Islamic honeycombs, but where Eastern designs scattered sound like sunlight through a prism, Western builders refined them to project voice like an arrow. The difference lies in the curves. Islamic vaults favor complex star patterns that diffuse sound gently, while Gothic ribs channel it upward in focused beams. Yet the shared principle is unmistakable. Both traditions treated ceilings as instruments. The exchange wasn't limited to grand monuments. In Sicily's Palatine Chapel, where Norman kings employed Arab masons, the wooden ceilings stalactite-like carvings aren't just decorative. Laser scans show they mimic the acoustic properties of muqarnas, filtering out street noise while amplifying the Latin Mass. Even the humble abbey of Mont Saint-Michel, rising from tidal flats, bears traces of this fusion. Its refectory's undulating walls recall the sound-diffusing surfaces of Cairo's Ibn Chalun Mosque, another stop on the Crusader Trail. Why does this cross-pollination matter? Because it shatters the myth of medieval Europe as an insular world. The same vaults that sang with Gregorian chant owed their voice to dialogues with Damascus and Toledo. When Cistercian monks adopted the pointed arch, an Islamic innovation, they weren't just borrowing a shape. They were embracing an entire philosophy of sacred sound, one that treated architecture as a living participant in worship. The stones of Cluny and the Alhambra may have prayed in different languages, but they whispered the same truths, that beauty and function are inseparable, and that great ideas like sound waves refuse to respect borders. The soaring dome of Hagia Sophia doesn't just crown the skyline of Istanbul, it hangs over the city like a giant stone bell, waiting to be struck by sound. Step inside and you'll feel it immediately. A single whispered word doesn't just echo, it swirls, climbing the curve of the dome before raining back down in a cascade of whispers. This isn't the sharp, directional acoustics of Gothic cathedrals, where ribs channel sound like arrows. Here, sound moves like incense smoke, slow, weightless, filling every corner with a golden haze of reverberation. The secret lies in the pendentives, those graceful triangular curves that transition the square base to the round dome. Where Gothic architects built upward with ribs, Byzantine masters sculpted space itself, shaping voids that cradle sound like cupped hands. Listen closely during Orthodox chant in a Byzantine church, and you'll hear how different this sonic philosophy is from the West. Gothic vaults amplify clarity, letting polyphony's intricate threads stay distinct. But under a Byzantine dome, voices blend into a single, luminous cloud, a perfect match for the slow, meditative cadence of Eastern chant. The dome of Hagia Sophia, completed in 537, has a reverberation time of nearly 11 seconds. That means a single note lingers longer than it takes to draw 3 breaths, creating an overlap of sound that feels less like architecture and more like the voice of the divine itself. Modern engineers have tried for decades to replicate this effect, but there's a catch. The dome's acoustics rely on imperfections, tiny irregularities in the brickwork that scatter sound waves just enough to prevent muddiness. Perfection, it turns out, would ruin the magic. The materials tell their own story. While Gothic builders prized limestone for its bright resonance, Byzantine architects turned to brick and lightweight mortar, creating structures that vibrated like drumheads. The dome of Hagia Sophia uses porous Rhodian bricks, their pumice-like texture filtering harsh frequencies while amplifying warm midtones. Even the plaster matters applied in varying thicknesses to tune the space like the body of a lute. But the real stroke of genius lies overhead. 40 windows pierce the base of the dome, not just for light, but to prevent sound waves from becoming trapped. This creates a delicate balance, enough reflection to sustain chant, but enough escape to avoid chaos. What's often overlooked is how these techniques evolved alongside liturgy. In the West, Gregorian chant's clear phrases demanded architectural precision, but the Byzantine tradition of awaken, a sustained drone note beneath melodies, required a space where sound could accumulate like layers of gilding. Walk into Hosios Laukas in Greece and you'll feel it. The 11th century dome seems to hold the awaken in perpetual suspension, as if the stone itself has taken up the chant. Modern acoustic scans reveal why the dome's curvature matches the wavelength of that fundamental drone, creating a resonance that modern singers describe as being held by the building. The parallels between East and West reveal a shared obsession, even if their solutions differed. Gothic ribs act like strings on a harp precisely tuned. Byzantine domes behave more like gongs, their vibrations slow and encompassing. Yet both traditions understood something profound, that sacred architecture isn't just seen, it's heard. In the caves of Cappadocia, where early Christians carved churches from volcanic rock, you'll find the same principle distilled to its essence. Cupolas no wider than a man's outstretched arms are shaped to amplify a single voice, proving that grandeur wasn't the goal. Communion was. Today, as Orthodox choirs still fill these spaces with ancient hymns, the stones answer as they always have, not with echoes but with presence. It's a reminder that the quest to make stones speak wasn't about engineering alone. It was about creating thresholds where heaven and earth might, for a moment, share the same breath. The secrets of singing vaults didn't disappear when the last Masons' Guild dissolved. They slipped into the hands of shepherds and farmers, hidden in the bones of barns and boundary walls. High in the Scottish Highlands, there's a crumbling fortress called Dunscaith Castle, nicknamed the Whispering Tower by locals. Its ruined stairwell shouldn't carry sound, yet stand at the base and murmur, and your voice will climb the spiral as clearly as if you were leaning over a listener's shoulder. This isn't some quirk of ruined poetry. The stairs were deliberately built with irregular steps, each one slightly taller or shorter than the last, to scatter sound waves upward. Folk tales claim it was a trick for sentries to pass warnings, but the technique is pure medieval acoustics, repurposed by clansmen who'd never seen a cathedral. In the alpine villages of Switzerland, you'll find chapels with wooden ceilings carved like upside-down boats, a direct echo of Cluny Abbey's vaults, but hewn from local larch instead of stone. The builders didn't have parchment blueprints, they had songs. Elders in the Engadin Valley still teach children to press their ears against new buildings while humming, listening for the moment when the walls answer with a sympathetic vibration. It's the same principle Masons used to test keystones, reduced to a folk ritual. Step inside the chapel of Garda, and you'll hear why. The ceiling's curvature follows the arc of a yodeler's voice, catching the high notes and spinning them into lingering harmonies. The real surprise is how these techniques adapted to everyday life. Breton farmers built dairy barns with hollow walls stuffed with dried seaweed, not just for insulation, but because the salty fibers filtered out the chaotic echoes of bawling cows. In Portugal's Alentejo region, wine cellars feature vaulted ceilings lined with cork, a material modern studios use for soundproofing. But here, the goal was the opposite, to amplify the tiniest fermentation bubble, helping vintners monitor their barrels. Even the humble Welsh longhouse held acoustic secrets. The cruck beams framing their roofs were often spaced at intervals matching the Welsh pentatonic scale, so rain pattering on the thatch played a ghostly melody. What's miraculous isn't just the survival of these tricks, but their invisibility. academics dismissed them as superstition until a chance discovery in Austria's Erztal Valley. A team restoring a 15th century granary found the floor joists notched with cryptic symbols, the same mason's marks found in Vienna's Gothic Stephansdom. Further study revealed the entire structure was tuned. The grain stored upstairs stayed drier because the resonating air currents prevented moisture buildup. The builders hadn't just copied cathedral acoustics, they'd hacked them for survival. Nowhere is this living thread more tangible than in Georgia's Svaneti region. Their medieval watchtowers, built to spot invaders, double as giant sound amplifiers. The staircases twist like seashells, funneling shouts from the ground into a focused beam that can carry for miles. But the real marvel is in the tower's foundations, layers of sheep's wool packed between stones, not just for cushioning earthquakes, but to dampen low-frequency rumbles and sharpen human voices. It's a technology so advanced, modern military engineers have studied it for battlefield communication. The tragedy is how much we've lost by not listening. In the Romanian Carpathians, a handful of elderly carpenters still know how to voice a wooden church door by carving hidden grooves along its edges, turning it into a giant soundboard that amplifies liturgy for those outside. But their apprentices have all left for cities, taking the secrets with them. Perhaps that's why the few surviving examples, like the Church of Iod, feel so uncanny. Stand near its door during a service, and you'll swear the hymns are coming from inside your own ribs. These vernacular builders may not have known Pythagoras or Gothic rib vaults, but their ears were just as finely tuned. They understood that good architecture doesn't just shelter the body, it sings to the soul, and in remote valleys and forgotten villages, that song never really stopped. It just changed key. Norman Foster's London studio looks nothing like a medieval mason's lodge. Glass tables gleam with 3D printed models, while algorithms churn through thousands of acoustic simulations. Yet the goal is strikingly familiar: to make stones sing again. Their latest breakthrough, the sonic brick, is a high-tech nod to those ancient vault builders. Each hollow terracotta block contains precision-tuned cavities that filter sound frequencies like a cathedral's ribbed ceiling. Stacked into walls, they create what engineers call directed resonance, channeling whispers across crowded rooms without electronics. It's ingenious, but as one artisan working on the project confessed while running his palm along a test panel, "We can replicate the curves, but something's missing." The stones don't answer back the way they do in charters. That elusive quality isn't just about materials or mathematics. Medieval masons didn't just calculate acoustics, they conversed with them. When a 12th century craftsman in Burgundy tapped a keystone and waited for its ring to fade, he wasn't measuring decay time, he was listening for consent. Guild records from Milan describe masters rejecting perfectly cut stones because they sang cold, a phrase modern acousticians struggle to translate into hertz or decibels. This wasn't mysticism, it was a different kind of rigor. Without oscilloscopes, these builders developed what researchers now call tactile acoustics, reading vibrations through fingertips, judging reverberation by how it prickled the skin. Contemporary attempts to recapture this intuition walk a fascinating line between innovation and archaeology. At ETH Zurich, architects are training AI on scans of Gothic vaults, hoping machine learning might spot patterns human eyes miss. The algorithm flagged something unexpected: slight asymmetries in what were long assumed to be perfectly symmetrical bays. Further testing revealed these flaws, consistently aligned with nodes where sound waves naturally converged, proving the masons had tuned their vaults like violinists tuning by ear. Yet when engineers used these insights to design a new concert hall in Dresden, the result felt technically impeccable but emotionally sterile. until they brought in a stonemason who insisted on hand-carving adjustments based on where the space felt heavy. His unscientific tweaks, guided by centuries-old guild techniques, finally made the walls breathe. The disconnect goes deeper than technique. Medieval workshops were ecosystems of listening. Apprentices spent years mixing mortar not just to learn consistency, but to memorize how different aggregates sang when struck. A ledger from Wells Cathedral lists payments for listening boys, children with acute hearing who'd scamper up scaffolding to report how chant carried from various heights. Modern construction lacks this embodied wisdom. Laser scanners can map a vault's curvature to the millimeter, but they can't replicate the Cistercian practice of dawn testing, where monks would sing the day's first prayers into half-built walls and mark where the sound stumbled. Perhaps the most poignant lesson comes from failures. When Barcelona's Sagrada Familia attempted to recreate the acoustic properties of Montserrat Abbey's choir, computer models suggested identical dimensions would suffice. The result, a cavernous echo that smeared polyphony into noise. Only after consulting surviving fragments of medieval tuning treatises did they grasp the missing element. Montserrat's walls weren't just curved, they were deliberately uneven, with microscopic variations that broke up sound waves like wind through leaves. Gaudi's team ultimately solved the problem by studding the ceiling with ceramic shards of varying thicknesses, a humble admission that algorithms alone couldn't mimic 8 centuries of iterative listening. The irony is that our tools have never been more advanced, yet our ears have never been further from the stone. Medieval builders worked within constraints that fostered creativity, limited materials, primitive instruments, but an intimacy with their craft that bordered on symbiosis. Watching a Japanese acoustician at Kyoto's new concert hall tap each cedar panel with a mallet, rejecting boards not for flaws in the grain but for flaws in their ring, you catch a glimpse of that old partnership returning. It's no accident the hall's acoustics are now compared to Cluny's lost nave, not because the math matched but because someone remembered to listen. Standing in the nave of a medieval cathedral, you don't just hear the music, you feel it in your ribs, your fingertips, even the roots of your teeth. Modern science is finally catching up to what those builders knew instinctively. Resonant spaces don't just carry sound, they reshape our minds. Brain scans of visitors at Canterbury Cathedral reveal something extraordinary. When Gregorian chant fills the vaults, listeners' brainwaves synchronize to the reverberation time, slipping into the same theta-state pattern seen in seasoned meditators. It's no accident these spaces feel transcendent. The 8-second echo of a Gothic choir mirrors the natural rhythm of human breathing at rest, literally tuning the nervous system to calm. This wasn't just happy coincidence. Medieval liturgy treated architecture as a partner in worship. Cistercian monks designed their abbeys with precise reverberation times to extend the final syllable of Amen, just long enough to overlap with the next prayer, creating an unbroken chain of sound that neuroscientists now recognize as a powerful tool for focus. The effect is startlingly similar to modern binaural beats therapy, where specific sound frequencies induce relaxation, but where today's noise-canceling headphones try to create isolation, these vaults worked with the environment. The porous limestone walls at Fontenay Abbey, for instance, subtly absorb low-frequency street noise while amplifying chant, effectively filtering distractions centuries before the concept of sound hygiene existed. The healing potential of these spaces goes deeper than stress relief. At the Hospital of St. John in Bruges, patients recovering from plague were placed beneath specially tuned vaults where musicians played melodies at frequencies now known to stimulate immune response. Records show recovery rates were notably higher in these chambers, an observation modern researchers attribute to sound's ability to reduce cortisol and increase interleukin levels. Even the humblest parish churches hid acoustic wisdom. The curved apse of St. Margaret's in York, for example, focuses a priest's voice directly onto the pews reserved for the sick and elderly, ensuring they could participate fully despite weakened hearing. What's tragic is how thoroughly we've forgotten this sonic medicine. Open-plan offices and concrete apartments bombard us with chaotic reverberation, a constant low-grade stressor linked to rising anxiety disorders. Japanese researchers studying forest bathing have found that the same calming alpha waves generated by nature walks also appear when subjects sit in medieval cloisters, proof that good acoustics can be as restorative as old-growth trees. Some forward-thinking hospitals are taking note. The Maggie's Cancer Centre in London, designed by Norman Foster, features vaulted ceilings inspired by Romsey Abbey, creating pockets of acoustic refuge where patients report significantly lower pain perception. The lesson isn't that we must live in cathedrals, but that we've underestimated how profoundly our surroundings shape our inner lives. Those whispering galleries and singing keystones weren't just engineering marvels, they were therapeutic tools crafted by people who understood sound as nourishment. In a world where noise pollution has been called the new second-hand smoke, perhaps it's time we listen to the stones again, not for their echoes of the past, but for their quiet wisdom about how to live. Deep in the archives of Vienna's Hofburg Palace lies a crumbling vellum sheet with staves of music and words that defy translation. Set the rib where the swallow dips, mix the lime with the widow's sigh. This isn't poetry, it's a Mason's songbook, one of the last surviving fragments of how acoustic secrets were passed down through generations. Imagine a world without blueprints, where master builders taught their apprentices not with diagrams but with melodies. The rhythm of a hammer strike became a metronome for mortar mixing. The cadence of lyrics encoded arch angles, and the rise and fall of a tune mirrored the very curves that made stone sing. The few surviving guild songs read like riddles set to music. In the Lay of the Living Stones, recovered from a French monastery's marginalia, the refrain warns, "Beware the keystone that answers twice / for one true note must suffice." Acoustic archaeologists now believe this refers to a tuning test. Masons would sing into a vault and reject any stone that produced dissonant overtones. Another fragment from York mentions the widow's walk, likely describing how to space columns by pacing the nave while humming a specific pitch, letting the echoes guide placement. These weren't just mnemonic devices, they were living equations turning music into mathematics. What's heartbreaking is how much has vanished. Guilds protected their songs as fiercely as trade secrets, with initiates swearing oaths never to write them down. The rare exceptions survived by accident scrawled on the backs of land deeds, hidden in psalters as seeming nonsense verses. In Lincoln Cathedral's library, a water-damaged leaf bears the tantalizing phrase, "3 breaths to the rose's fall," possibly instructing how long reverberation should last beneath a rose window. At Wells, a scribbled drinking song includes the line, "Pack the dust of the old moon," now understood to mean adding crushed volcanic glass to mortar for high-frequency clarity. Modern attempts to reconstruct these songs have yielded startling breakthroughs. A team at Cambridge University set medieval musicologists alongside stonemasons to decode the lay of the living stones. When they sang the recovered verses in Norwich Cathedral's cloister, something uncanny happened. The melody's sustained notes aligned perfectly with the space's natural resonances, causing certain pillars to vibrate visibly. It was as if the architecture recognized its own blueprint. Similarly, a Swiss choir singing reconstructed Cistercian mortar mixing chants in the ruins of Hauterive Abbey found their harmonies suddenly amplified, but only when standing on the original foundation lines. The right music, it seems, can wake sleeping stones. The real tragedy is how thoroughly this oral tradition was silenced. When guilds dissolved during the Reformation, their songs faded into folk memory. Some scholars believe remnants survive in unexpected places: the call and response songs of Basque sheepherders, the rhythmic work chants of Welsh slate miners, even the sea shanties of Cornish fishermen. All share eerie similarities with the Mason fragments: verses structured around counting intervals, lyrics that map physical actions, and melodies designed to carry over noise. Perhaps the most poignant clue comes from an unlikely source: the echo of a single word. In 2018, acousticians testing Burgos Cathedral's vaults noticed something peculiar. When a tenor sang the word Deus at a specific pitch, the space responded with a perfect fifth harmony, exactly as described in a 13th century Castilian guild song fragment. The builders hadn't just tuned the stone to chant, they'd tuned it to prayer. Now, as researchers race to stitch together these sonic scraps, each recovered note feels like lighting a candle in a long, dark chamber. The songs may be broken, but the stones remember their tune, and somewhere between the lines of cryptic lyrics and vibrating vaults, we might just hear the past speaking, not in whispers but in chords. The ruins of Cluny Abbey haven't heard Gregorian chant in centuries, but step inside what's left of its great transept, and the stones still remember. Archaeologists armed with nothing more than a balloon and a microphone are now unlocking those memories. Here's how it works: a small burst of sound, like a popped balloon, sends waves ricocheting through the surviving arches. Sophisticated software then maps those echoes, comparing them to digital models of the original vaults. The result: a ghostly imprint of how sound would have danced through the space when monks filled it with song. This isn't just measurement, it's resurrection. What makes these techniques revolutionary is their delicacy. Traditional archaeology often requires dismantling to understand, but acoustic archaeology listens without touching. At the crumbled Cathedral of Saint Sauveur in Bruges, researchers used laser scans to measure microscopic vibrations in broken pillars. Like detectives analyzing a shattered bell, they discovered the fragments still carried the ring of their original shape. Feed that data into a resonance algorithm, and suddenly you're hearing the nave's lost acoustics not as a dry simulation, but as a living echo of the past. The team even identified sound shadows where side chapels once stood, their absence revealed by how the air current carries a hum. The real magic happens when these soundscapes meet historical records. In Canterbury Cathedral, archivists found an 11th century manuscript describing how the choir's voices would hang like incense beneath certain arches. Modern testing confirmed it. The vaults over the original choir stalls have a natural sustain of 8.2 seconds, almost exactly matching the duration of a medieval neume. Elsewhere, in the roofless shell of Glastonbury Abbey, acoustic modeling revealed why pilgrims described hearing the Jesus Mass as if angels were singing behind them. The vanished clerestory windows had been angled to bounce sound from hidden choir lofts, creating an ethereal effect modern engineers call vertical surround sound. But the frontier isn't just reconstructing, it's interacting. At Mont Saint Michel Scriptorium, visitors can now don augmented reality headsets and whisper into the ruins. Advanced algorithms adjust their voice in real time, applying the room's original acoustic profile until their words seem to ripple through long vanished walls. It's uncanny to hear your own voice transformed, as if the stones are lending you their centuries-old resonance. Similar projects let you play ruined spaces like instruments, tapping a virtual reconstruction of Fountains Abbey's refectory walls to hear how its mortar density created distinct tonal zones, each tuned to different parts of the daily liturgy. The implications stretch far beyond nostalgia. In Spain's deserted monastery of San Juan de Duro, acoustic scans uncovered something textbooks missed deliberately: sour notes in certain chapels. Historical context solved the riddle. These were spaces reserved for penitents, where dissonant acoustics amplified the discomfort of atonement. Meanwhile, in Maulbronn's cloister, researchers found vaults tuned to amplify the cough of a sick monk, an early healthcare monitoring system. Each discovery peels back another layer of how deeply sound shaped medieval life. What's next? Scientists are now developing sonic pollen, microscopic sensors that can be scattered through ruins to map airflow and resonance at a granular level. Others are training AI to predict acoustic properties from construction records alone, potentially recreating lost spaces like the original St. Paul's Cathedral purely from parchment descriptions. The dream to one day stand in any ruin, whisper a note, and hear the past whisper back, not as an approximation, but as the builders themselves intended. After all, these stones weren't meant to be silent. They were built for conversation, and finally, after centuries, we're learning how to listen. Want to hear how medieval masons tested acoustics without a single high-tech tool? Grab a ceramic bowl from your kitchen, the kind with a smooth, curved interior, and press your lips close to its rim while humming a steady note. Feel how the vibrations travel through the porcelain, amplifying and coloring the sound. That's your first lesson in architectural acoustics, straight from the playbook of 12th century craftsmen. They didn't need oscilloscopes or decibel meters. Just like your bowl experiment, they relied on everyday materials and razor-sharp observation. Take your bowl outside and face it toward a brick wall or the curved side of a garden planter. Speak into it while slowly stepping backward. Notice how certain pitches suddenly ring clearer or fade away. Medieval builders called this finding the stone's voice. They'd test quarry blocks the same way, tapping them with mallets and listening for a bright, sustained ring, a sign of good resonance, versus a dull thud, which meant the stone would swallow sound. You can replicate this with pavers or tiles from a hardware store. Stack two bricks slightly apart and hum across the gap. The air pocket between them will act like a primitive resonance chamber, just like the hollow voids masons left behind cathedral walls. For a more advanced experiment, head to a parking garage or tunnel, the modern equivalent of a half-built vault. Clap your hands once and count how long the echo lasts. Medieval apprentices did this constantly, using the delay between sound and reflection to judge a space's reverberation time. Too short and chant would sound weak, too long and prayers would turn to muddle. Try varying your pitch. Higher notes bounce differently than low ones, which explains why Gothic vaults often have alternating rib thicknesses, to balance treble and bass like a natural equalizer. The real magic happens when you involve water. Fill a bathtub and sing into an overturned pot submerged at an angle, those warping, watery overtones. They mimic how Cistercian monks tested chapel acoustics by placing bowls of water beneath half-finished arches, watching how ripples revealed sound wave patterns. Or try this: tape string to a metal spoon and dangle it against a window pane while someone speaks across the room. The vibrations traveling through the glass approximate how masons used iron rods embedded in walls to tune them like guitar strings. What's revelatory about these simple tests isn't just their ingenuity, it's how they reframe our relationship with sound. Modern life bombards us with noise, but medieval craftsmen treated every whisper as a conversation with space. They heard architecture as much as they saw it, discovering that a well-placed curve could turn a murmur into music. So next time you're sipping coffee from that bowl, pause and tap its side. You're not just holding dishware, you're cradling 8 centuries of acoustic wisdom, one that proves you don't need a cathedral to make stone sing. a curious ear and a kitchen shelf will do just fine. The singing vaults of the Middle Ages remind us that architecture isn't just about space, it's about experience. These builders didn't just raise stones, they orchestrated encounters with the divine, the communal, and the self. As we rediscover their techniques, we're not just preserving history, we're relearning how to listen. Perhaps in our noisy modern world, their greatest lesson is this: true harmony begins when we design not just for the eye, but for the ear and soul. Consider the way sound shapes our lives today, how the muffled hush of a library steadies our thoughts, or how the roar of a stadium electrifies a crowd. Medieval builders understood this power instinctively. They crafted spaces that didn't just shelter bodies but transformed voices into something transcendent. When a monk's chant swelled beneath the ribs of a Gothic vault, it wasn't merely heard, it was felt, vibrating through bone and breath, turning individual prayer into collective awe. That's the magic we've lost in our flat, fluorescent-lit modernity, the understanding that walls can do more than divide, they can sing. What's striking is how democratic their approach was. Unlike today's concert halls, where perfect acoustics are reserved for those who can afford the best seats, these vaults offered their gifts freely. A pauper kneeling in the back of Chartres heard the same celestial resonance as a king in the choir. The architecture itself was a great equalizer, bending sound to include rather than exclude. In an age of earbuds and noise-canceling headphones, where we curate private soundscapes, there's something radical in their vision of shared acoustic space. Yet the legacy of these vaults isn't just about the past. From hospitals using resonant design to ease patient anxiety, to classrooms engineered so every student catches the teacher's words, we're finally remembering that sound shapes well-being. The Japanese practice of forest therapy has a medieval parallel, Cistercian abbey ruins, where visitors report the same calm as in ancient woods, thanks to vaults that diffuse stress-inducing noise. Even urban planners are taking notes, studying how the scalloped walls of Catalan chapels can soften the screech of traffic. The real tragedy isn't that we forgot these techniques, it's that we stopped valuing what they represent. In a world obsessed with speed and efficiency, we built spaces that prioritize function over feeling. But the stones of Cluny and Canterbury whisper a counter-argument that beauty and utility aren't rivals. A vault can support tons of weight while also turning whispers into music. A wall can block the wind and teach it to hum. So the next time you step into a train station or a waiting room, pause and listen. Does the space lift your voice or bury it? Does it connect you to others or lock you inside your head? The test of good architecture isn't just whether it stands. It's whether it speaks, and if we're wise enough to listen, the old stones still have much to say. Their greatest gift wasn't the technology of sound, it was the wisdom that spaces should nurture, not just endure. After all, we don't just live in buildings, we resonate with them. And somewhere between the echoes of the past and the acoustics of the future, there's still a place for walls that remember how to sing.